What's up, everyone? Today we're going to look at 3 different spring foliage management techniques and how we apply them to a few different trees. What I have here in front of me is a star magnolia, and that's Magnolia stellata. It's not a super common bonsai subject, but it is a good one, and I've had this one for a number of years. As you can see, it's got a lot of leaves on it, and so what we're going to be doing right now is reducing the leaves back. Now, last summer, I actually allowed some of the shoots to extend, and I haven't trimmed them off. So I'm going to start by trimming back the shoots, and then we're going to do initially a leaf reduction. So you can see that just eliminating the shoots doesn't actually get us any closer to having light or visibility into the center of the composition. So now I'm going to go ahead and start removing leaves. That's about an 80% leaf reduction, and all I did was take each branch and cut it back so there was essentially one leaf at each node point or one leaf at each branch tip. So the first technique that I have just demonstrated is basically shoot and leaf reduction in order to create a more penetrable canopy so that the buds that are on the interior get as much light as all of those leaves that are feeding the buds that are on the exterior of the tree. Here I have a relatively mature Trident Maple. This is the tree that I exhibited in the 2024 Pacific Bonsai Expo as part of a 3-point display with a small juniper. And as you can see, it has a lot of leaves and a lot of leaf density. Now, I never show this tree with leaves on it because this particular tree is a seedling that came from seed from a street tree here in San Francisco. And as it happens, the genetics are not ideal as a Trident. So I only ever show it in winter silhouette. But leaf reduction on Trident maples is something that's really important, particularly for more mature trees like this, because if I leave all of these leaves that are on the canopy alone, all of the interior twigging that's in here is not going to be getting any light whatsoever because you can see that it's just super dense. So I'm going to go ahead and do leaf trimming on this because otherwise it won't remain in show quality. All right, and now with all the leaves thinned out, I can kind of see in here, and you know, I could keep going, but the idea here is really not to completely defoliate the tree in this case. And don't get me wrong, defoliation is a technique that you should be using on Trident maples. But in the case of this tree, I often find, particularly growing it here in San Francisco where we have cool summers, that the tree's not super strong. And so a partial defoliation or leaf reduction like we've been looking at, rather than a full defoliation, allows the tree some sort of resources to rely on while it begins to issue new growth again. And the main goal of doing this leaf reduction for me, or in my mind, is that there's a lot of foliage that just in the few weeks since it budded out, the tree has already given up on these leaves. You can see that there were some yellow or even brown leaves in the interior of the tree, and that is what we're trying to avoid. Basically, we want to make the decisions about which leaves and shoots are going to stay rather than having the tree just give up on foliage that is getting too much shade. All right, in the first 2 examples, what we did basically was just to remove whole leaves or shoots from the tree. Now, if you want to take it one step further with those same trees, or with a different tree, as in this case, which I have an Acer palmatum, momiji, or standard Japanese maple, you can do that leaf reduction and then take it one step further. So let me start with the leaf reduction and then I'll go back into what I'm talking about. All right, so as I'm doing this, I am just removing one of each pair of leaves, and then because this tree is not very mature and it's sending out a bunch of really strong shoots as a result of the cutback that it had after being removed from the field, I'm going to go ahead and also thin down the shoots. So this is, up to this point, similar to what we've done with the previous two trees, except this is a younger tree developmentally. So a lot of the branching, I actually left the growing tips in place because I want the branches to run, and I just want to have more light in the interior so the small buds that are in here don't die off. But if you want to accomplish that same thing on a Japanese maple that is more mature, after you've reduced the leaves by half, essentially, because they're in pairs, taking off one of the two leaves, you can go one step further and trim the remaining leaf. So there's probably a million ways to do this, but I'm going to illustrate what should rightfully be called the middle finger technique, and that's because you'll find out in a minute. It was shown to me by Daisaku Nomoto, who's a Japanese professional, and essentially after that 50% leaf reduction, what he has his customers do and what he does on his own trees is to remove all of the fingers except for the center one from each leaf. That's going to accomplish probably an 80 or 90% reduction in the overall leaf mass, encouraging shorter nodes as well as a lot of basic back budding and whatnot, so that you can then go back and pick the buds that you want to keep. I just want to point out that the techniques that I've been showing are not necessarily applicable to all trees. This tree is a lot younger than that exposed root Trident. It's sort of like my version 2 of it that I just took out of a large growing container and have potted down into this sort of medium-sized pot to begin working on the branches and whatnot. So there's not a lot of density here. I can actually kind of mostly see through this tree as it is. And the work that goes into this tree at this stage is very different than what I've just shown you on the Magnolia and the older Trident Maple. So let's take a look. All right, and that's kind of it. Basically, I put 3 or 4 pieces of wire on here. It doesn't look super pretty, and the point of this work is just to start creating the scaffolding of branches that I need to go with the rest of the trunk of the tree. I also removed a large chunk of what was a straight branch that escaped from below the portion that had been wired a couple of years ago. So all of this work is really rough, but the point is that there's not really any reason for leaf reduction on this tree because I'm not trying to protect any lower branches or get into the refinement of the fine branching that's already there. I don't have enough fine branching in order for it to really matter or for the canopy to be too dense. Similarly, complete defoliation wouldn't really do anything for me here because I need this tree to grow out and make some branching before I go into defoliation mode, which is really for creating little tiny branches. And finally, we have complete defoliation and cutback. While this is a common technique for Trident maples, it is not necessarily a common technique for other trees. In many cases, deciduous trees like Acer palmatums or magnolias, as we've seen in the earlier parts of this video, are not particularly well adapted to complete defoliation. So we can use it on a certain species like Trident maples, but in the end, it is something that you should do with some caution. All right, and with that, we're done. So basically, you can think of defoliation and foliage reduction as a continuum of potential techniques. We apply them differently to different species and based on both the age and stages of development and even the health of the tree. So in this case, this Trident Maple is relatively healthy, put out a nice big fat set of leaves, and so I expect that cutting them all off like this will yield a pretty good result, and I will get another flush of smaller leaves relatively quickly and continue building my twigging here as densely as I'm hoping. Although now that I'm noticing, some of the twigs actually didn't bud at all. That wraps up this spring foliage management video. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.